Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Grow Summer Sessions here at Living Waters Church. My name is Luke. I'm on our pastoral team here, and I'm also the host of our Grow Summer Sessions, and we're really glad that you can join us. Maybe you're watching this live. Maybe you're watching this later on. We are recording, but wherever we find you, we're really glad you can join us tonight. We've been discussing all kinds of themes and having great conversations about all kinds of really important content and questions of our culture and society over the past number of weeks. And tonight, we're really excited to talk about a very specific topic that's quite dear to Living Waters Church's heart. Tonight, our topic is called Faith on the Margins, Learning to Remember the Forgotten. And we're honored tonight to welcome Richard Belcham, who is the director of Inasmuch Community Society. And that's a society that helps connect, support, and love, care for, bless, do so many things for refugee claimants, specifically in British Columbia, and has connections across Canada. And because refugees are from around the world, connections around the world. So Richard's joining us tonight to share about that topic, faith on the margins, learning to remember the forgotten. Richard's going to share for a while, probably about 20, 25 minutes. And then he and I are going to sit down and, as is our format, have a conversation. I'll prepare some questions, and we are inviting you, if you're joining us live, to type in your questions. And we're going to log and track with those questions. And I'll do my best to ask Richard those questions when we have our discussion in about 20 or 25 minutes. And you can ask them as you go. I'll endeavor to have my computer up here and we can ask them as live as we possibly can. So thanks for joining us tonight. Those of us who are watching live, we welcome you. And those of us who are watching later, we welcome you as well. And we welcome Richard. Thanks for joining us tonight, Richard, and welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. This is a new experience for me being on YouTube, so I'm excited to kind of not see you all, but know you're there. So it's been really interesting listening to the Grow Summer series, as well as the Sunday sermon series about neighborhood. And it feels like it's all been feeding into a theme. And so when I came to prepare the talk tonight, it felt like I was, to use an old-fashioned expression, pushing at an open door. So I hope what we talk about tonight will resonate with you and will build on what's both gone before and what lies ahead. So just last week, I was sitting in front of a crackling fire because it was a bit chilly where I was, enjoying the sound of loons on a lake while reading a book loaned to me by my dear friend Gord, and read this great passage about Jesus. He was notorious, yes, that's the right word, for hanging out with the wrong types. In contrast with today, when so much of our Christianity is being with the right people, in the right places at the right time, Jesus was always in the wrong places, with the wrong people, at the wrong time, according to religious establishment. And you see, I believe, when read with fresh eyes and an open mind, the gospel of Jesus is, by any definition, pretty radical. Not only for people who are forgotten or marginalized or disenfranchised, but because he took what was celebrated by the culture of the day and turned it upside down, turned it on its head. Jesus, it would appear, cared very little for the things we often value today: a nice car, a well-stocked bank account, or a good job title. He gave a very strong message in Luke 6. But woe to you who are rich, for you are receiving your comfort in full. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Give to everyone who asks of you, and whoever takes away what is yours, do not demand it back. To be honest, when I read that, after first becoming a Christian 5 years ago, it didn't really fit with what I thought my future was going to be. And I wondered what God wanted me to do. As it turned out, God had already spoken. He'd already laid out what he wanted. And he already laid out what he wanted me and all of us to do. And it was all there in the Bible. I just had to read it to understand. And if you were watching the last episode of the Grow Summer series, you'll have heard Carolyn already talking about it. It was the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke that actually hit home. It was so radically different to the prevailing culture of the Western world and what my life trajectory was. It was all about stepping out of my comfort zone and following Jesus's teaching in real life. We all know the parable pretty well. It was about a traveller who was stripped of his clothing, beaten and left half dead at the side of the road. First a priest and then a Levite comes by, but both avoid the man. Finally, a Samaritan happens upon the traveller. Samaritans and Jews despised each other, but the Samaritan helped the injured man. Jesus told the story in answer to the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Of course, there's the obvious moral of the story, which we all probably learned as kids. You should care for your neighbors, and that's true. But if you dig deeper into it and look at the story and take a look at the reaction of the people in the parable, it's actually a challenge to who really is our neighbor. It asks us to consider how we see people who are not in our regular circle, or with a coronavirus lens, people who are not in our bubble. In fact, it even challenges us to think about how we accept help and whether we're willing to receive help from people who are not like us. Because it turns out your neighbor isn't the family, the nice one on the other side of the picket fence, or the sweet old lady at the end of the road who waves when you're on your way to work, or even the neighbor down the hall in your condo building who lends you a cup of sugar. It turns out that's not who Jesus was talking about at all. If the parable of the Good Samaritan seems really familiar to you, then you may have overlooked again how radical it was when it was told. It was about unclean people in desperate situations, demanding radical responses from people who would much rather choose, in reality, to walk on by. It is about the forgotten, and it's definitely not comfortable. And it's definitely not really what we want to read in the comfort of our own lives here in British Columbia. But it's the truth. And like every good parable, it has a strong call to action. The final words Jesus uses in the parable are, "Now go and do the same." Throughout the Bible, from beginning to end, there are commands for us to walk with the forgotten. For example, in Proverbs, it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of those who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." Or as we heard recently from the book of James, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm, stay well fed," and does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. Look at the life of Jesus. He was born around the back of an inn in a feeding trough, nothing fancy. His visitors were shepherds who were looked down on and marginalized by polite society, and he surrounded himself with fishermen and tax collectors and worse. As the UK Guardian newspaper put it a few weeks ago, Jesus was overtly on the side of the poor, the excluded, the ignored, the disenfranchised, and the exploited. He was on their side when it damaged his reputation, his earning potential, and any hope he had of moving up the ranks of religious or political power. He was on their side when he drove out the price manipulators and rent seekers in the temple courts, and he was on their side when it cost him his life. You see, each one of us is challenged to follow his example. But what are we supposed to do with that? How should we respond? And who are the forgotten we'd much rather walk by on the other side to avoid? Are they the folks living with homelessness on the streets of Langley? Or people wrestling with addiction? Or women wearing hijabs? Or flamboyantly dressed folks on the Pride Parade? Or bikers covered in tattoos who we're scared of? Or the gang members doing drug deals in back alleys? Or a man with mental health issues screaming out on the SkyTrain? And what about the person who sits next to you in church, who just lost their mother and doesn't want to say anything? The people who look different and sound different and behave differently from what we're comfortable with. The forgotten. Aren't they too our neighbors? Aren't they too made in the image of God? And if they are, and they are, what does that say about our image of God? Have we made God fit into our narrow thinking and small worlds? or is he shaping ours? Because after all, Christianity is transforming. It turns everything on its head and says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. It doesn't say, be safe, be comfortable, be complacent, be #blessed. It says, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Store up your treasure in heaven. Take care of people who have no money. Take care of the needy. Speak up for the people who are oppressed. Love the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. These forgotten people are our neighbours, the people on the edges and the people on the margins who you'd much rather avoid. They're the ones that Jesus commands us to care about. They are the ones we are to focus on. They are the ones we are commanded to love. Many of us were led to believe that the soul is all that matters, and we shouldn't really be bothered with the physical realm. Although we are encouraged to live for eternal purposes and not just worldly ones, the body and its needs should never be passed off as something second-rate or something to be ignored. You see, the Bible isn't concerned with only those people who are spiritually poor. It's concerned with people who need help physically as well as spiritually. Now, as the folks who know me well will testify, I'm definitely not a saint. I'm not special. I'm not different from anyone else. But what I can tell you is this: each one of us can make a difference. Jesus didn't save us to be comfortable or complacent. He didn't want us just to be Christians on Sundays or Thursday evenings on YouTube. He wants us to walk with forgotten people, to be Jesus in those dark corners and scary places. A blogger I saw on the internet recently put it this way: Jesus yearned for the hearts of the marginalized, the forgotten, isolated, shunned, and persecuted people. Throughout the Gospels and the totality of Scripture, God's heart for the people on the outskirts of society is evident. The point is that in his day, Jesus loved the people who were not loved by the people of society. For example, the woman at the well was poor, a woman, a Samaritan who the Jews despised and socially looked down on because of her many divorces. But despite all of that, Jesus talked with her anyway. Jesus created space to speak with her and shared the truth of eternal life with her, even when the majority looked the other way. Now, please be assured, I'm not wagging my finger and saying you should do this or that. I'm not telling you what to do. Honestly, it's really not my place. But a good question for all of us to ask is this: what does God want us to do? And he answers that very specifically in one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament. What does the Lord require of you? It asks in Micah chapter 1:6, going on to answer, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And for my wife Angela and I specifically, acting justly and loving mercy is about working with people seeking refugee protection or asylum seekers. That's how God asked us to walk humbly with him. But here's the thing: was I really able and prepared to answer the call, now go and do the same? In truth, not really. I wasn't prepared at all. I had to ask myself some really tough questions. Did what I learned in the Bible really mean anything? Could I ignore what it very clearly stated? And would I walk away from the people I'd been called to serve? Even asking these questions made me uncomfortable. And to be honest, it still does. If I'm honest, I didn't want to answer the questions because I knew it would lead to me giving up control, giving up my ambitions, giving up my comfort. But with God's help, we did begin to answer those questions for ourselves. And we realized that if we were going to do what God required of us, we would have to do things that on the surface seem like complete madness. You see, we quit our regular jobs and now work to help these incredible people who have left everything they hold dear behind and fled to Canada. Unlike government or privately sponsored refugees, these people have no status, no support, and no visibility. They are the people who seek protection from persecution, from murder and mutilation. People who have trudged across fields and crawled through bushes and across borders so they can find safety right here in BC. People with nothing but the bag that they could carry. People who are bruised and broken and hurting. People who are forgotten. Is it all sunshine and rainbows? Certainly not. Sometimes the work we do is very tough. We walk with people through difficult times and sadness and regret and loss and an aching for what went before. It can break your heart. But there's also hope, and where there's hope, there seems to be laughter too. They are amazing people. Now, we can't pretend we know what it's like to be a refugee, but we've had a good fortune of spending a lot of time with people who have been. And I can tell you this, all the rhetoric on TV, all the scaremongering, all the untruths about them disappear. But they're just one example of people who have been forgotten. So walk in their shoes a while, put yourself in their place. Close your eyes and imagine fleeing from your home and all you hold dear. Would you choose that? And if you did, wouldn't you need help? I'm not telling you all this to be a hero. I'm not telling you this for accolades or to impress you. But if you're looking for Jesus and struggling to find him, you may be looking in the wrong places. You'll find him in the margin, not the mainstream. You'll find him with people who are dispossessed, disenfranchised, and diseased. Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, wrote this: Christians will be found in the neighborhood of Jesus, but Jesus is found in the neighborhood of human confusion and suffering, defenselessly alongside those in need. If being baptized is being led to where Jesus is, then being baptized is being led towards the chaos and neediness of a humanity that has forgotten its own destiny. So how on earth to make sense of this in a practical, down-to-earth way? What does this mean for all of us in real life? Well, not everyone has been called to do what we did, but everyone has been called to help people who are forgotten. It doesn't have to be complicated. God has given us the skills and talents and abilities that he really wants us to use. As my wife Angela says, sometimes it's not until you look back do you realize that all your experiences, good or bad, are being used by God for his purpose. And all the skills he's given you are exactly what he needs. So I guess the most obvious thing that each one of us can do, and in all seriousness should do, is to be part of helping meet the most basic human and physical needs of those who have been forgotten. There are so many ways to get involved. It doesn't have to be complicated. Volunteer at a shelter, raise money for the food bank, teach English to refugees. Love is best experienced actively. Love is found in a smile, in peeling potatoes at the gateway of hope, in painting a fence or doing yard work, or just sitting listening to someone, as well as offering a helping hand or providing a bed for the night. And just as a side note, if you're already doing this kind of thing, and I know many people at Living Waters are, then invite someone to join you. Because sometimes starting to walk with those who are forgotten is intimidating and strange, and you may not know where to start. But when someone makes it easy for you, you just get involved. So take a moment to think, who can I invite? Who can I bring along with me? You may find that simple act of invitation will break down barriers for others, and it'll be just what they need to jump right in. Secondly, we can make space for people to tell their stories. Please stop thinking of people in homogenous groups: the homeless, the poor, the addicted, prisoners, foreigners, immigrants. Like you and me, these people have their own history and their own identities, and they've been uniquely created by God. Stop talking and start listening. You may find you have a lot more in common than you think. And finally, share the good news of Jesus. Ask to pray with people. Their hearts and souls matter too, and they very well may be aching for the comfort of prayer. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But it can challenge you to your core. It may make you question many things that you hold dear, and challenge you to truly think about those who are left behind and fall between the cracks. But you know what? As you seek to walk with those who have been forgotten or pushed to the margins, you may find, as it says in Hebrews, that you have entertained angels unawares. You could find yourself serving in ways that stagger you. You'll probably be pushed right outside your comfort zone, and I hope you will be. But you'll also be set on an amazing adventure, which will lead you exactly where you're supposed to be. And if you doubt your resolve, or face tough times, ask yourself this question. When you arrive at those metaphorical pearly gates and they swing open for you, imagine how it will be here to hear the words from our Creator. Welcome, my good and faithful servant. Enter the joy of your Lord. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing with us and sharing your heart and being open. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So we're going to spend some time now having a chat.
Okay.
And I got a bunch of questions for you.
Okay.
And there will be an examination at the
Okay.
end. I'm just kidding. But yeah, there's a bunch of us watching. There's a bunch of us hanging out right now, which is pretty cool.
That's great.
Because we don't really get to do that. But yet we're doing that in a way live together in this regard. So I wanted to start just by asking, first of all, for you to paint us a picture of Inasmuch and tell us about who Inasmuch is, what Inasmuch does, and your vantage point of it as director.
Yeah. So Inasmuch, let me just say sometimes that people describe Disneyland as the happiest place on earth.
Okay.
And I'm inclined to argue with them sometimes because despite all the many and difficult stories we hear through our work at Inasmuch, it's actually a very happy place. Yeah. So Inasmuch is basically 2 transition houses in Abbotsford, and we look after up to 18 or 20 refugee claimants at any one time. Families, couples, mums and babies. We've had folks who have come to us 6 or 8 months pregnant and have had their baby with us. We've had everyone from age in their 70s down to newborns. And we walk with them through that first 6 months of their life in Canada. So we help them with settlement services. So all those things that you need when you come to Canada when you're new. So a bank account and help getting on income assistance if you're not working, and a work permit, and then all the legal stuff with the refugee claim process and what have you, as well as just helping them with their basic living needs. So providing them, sometimes they've arrived and they've come from detention because they've been smuggled to Canada. Yeah. And all they have is a plastic bag from the CBSA with a few clothes in. So we help them with winter coats and bicycles and all manner of amazing things that people come alongside them. And then most importantly, or not most importantly, but as importantly, we also provide a really good English program. In Vancouver, there's about a year's waiting list to get on the English lessons. Wow. For refugee claimants. At Inasmuch, we provide up to 4 hours a week, one-on-one English, which is amazing, which is what my wife Angela does, and she heads that up. And then the most important thing is that we love them unconditionally. We don't care who they are, where they've come from, what religion they are, what race they are, what gender they are. It doesn't matter to us. We love them, and we walk with them to get them prepared for the future and their new lives in Canada.
So I'd imagine that there's quite a mixture of people from different places and backgrounds and ages and experiences, all to some degree living a bit of a communal life together. What's that like?
It's very interesting, and it's nowhere near as conflict driven as you would imagine. We've had people from opposite sides of a war. Yeah. We've had people from different countries in the Middle East, which traditionally wouldn't get on with each other, living in the same house. And very often, once you start sharing food and living spaces and you realize you're both in it together, then some of those things go away and people start to look differently at each other. And I think that's the joy of what we do. And the team, we have an amazing team of settlement workers and housing people, and they all come alongside the folks, and we laugh together, we eat together, we pray together, and we, to use that expression, do life together. And it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a really special place. Having seen it in action and followed the journey for a few years, it's a really special expression that I don't think a lot of our society even knows that places like this exist. Mm-hmm. And I think once you get to know an organization like Inasmuch, you go, this is incredible. How can I support it? How can I get involved? People are really thankful for your talk. And I just want to say to anybody who's watching live that you're more than welcome to type in any live questions, and I'm going to do my best to put them to Richard, as long as they're within the theme of what we're talking about tonight.
Unless you really like my shirt, in which I'd welcome comments about that. Yeah,
we're welcome to comments about that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your story for just a second, because you mentioned becoming a Christian 5 years ago, and now you're in the position that you're in within as much, and yourself and Ange serve there. Can you lay out for us a little bit of the progression of saying yes to God in terms of a life of faith and acknowledging and participating and going, I'm going to do the whole life thing to God, and then ending up where you are now, like starting with that heart moment and then now where you are with your hands? Like, what was that progression like? Can you tell us a little bit of that journey? I know it's a big question.
That's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to the fact when I realized, when I became a Christian, and that journey, that's a whole other story. And it involved, big subjects like who am I, and the meaning of forgiveness, and letting go of the past, and realizing that I'm not defined by the past.
Right.
And that gave me a complete set of fresh eyes. And then, of course, I wanted to know more, so I read the Bible, and sure, I grew up in a Christian home, and at the age of 5 went to Sunday school and everything, but it didn't really stick.
Yeah.
And so when I read the Bible again after 30 years of not, I realized that what I was reading was really radical.
Yeah.
And the bit that I hadn't joined up the dots when I was a child, I joined up the dots. And so I'm kind of one of those people who decide I'm going to do something and I go all in and jump in, and sometimes 6 months later I do something else, but this one seems to have stuck. And so when I read the Bible, and particularly the Gospels, I realized that I couldn't carry on doing what I was doing.
Right.
It was very comfortable. And I had a great corporate job. I worked for a fantastic company. I had a really fulfilling job that challenged me and so on. And, we had creature comforts. We had a nice condo in Fort Langley and a nice car and all of that stuff. And I realized that actually wasn't the fulfilling thing.
Right.
What was fulfilling was saying, what I read here, this is what I want to do. This is where I believe I should be. And so we were in a fortunate position that we were able to walk out on that corporate life and the comfort. And I'm not saying we're living in a shack in Abbotsford, because that would be a lie. We live in a nice condo in Abbotsford, but maybe we gave up on ambitions of the future and all of that kind of thing.
Right.
Because actually the joy in serving the people we serve and looking after the people who are on the margins, and refugee claimants, I have to be honest, are pretty much on the margins when they first come. To do that is way more fulfilling and way more, it just seems to fit with what I read in the Bible. And I guess that was the journey. Do I really believe what I say I believe? Do I really believe what we talk about in church? Do I really want to be the Christian that comes to church on a Sunday and goes, oh, that was nice, where do you want to go for lunch? Or do I want someone to go, why do you do what you do?
Right.
And I think that's the motivation, is the work that we do. Are people who are on the margins ask those questions because they want to know, why would you bother with me?
Yeah.
Why do you care? And so that's where those conversations come from. And maybe I have a social justice heart, but it just seemed wrong to be comfortable when there were people who weren't.
Right. So connected to that a little bit, I want to talk about critiquing our society from a safe place, right? I mean, you said earlier that your decision and Ange's decision to do what you've done is not necessarily everybody's path, that there's different paths, there's different roads, that there's room for us. So from a position of safety, because often people go, well, I can't do that. We still, I think, can critique society a little bit. So my question to you, and you said the gospel of Jesus is radical. My follow-up question to that is, why do you think that learning to remember the forgotten is still as radical today as it was back then? What do you see in our society that concerns you the closer you've gotten to people on the margins, that you'd say that we're missing there's a gap here.
There was a moment when, so Inasmuch has an office in Abbotsford as well as the two houses, and it's based at the Abbotsford Community Hub Centre, which is a new multi-agency initiative that deals with folks who are at risk of and dealing with homelessness, as well as people dealing with addiction, and all kinds of marginalised people.
Yeah.
And when I went there and I worked there and I saw the work that these folks were doing, and it's incredible, and I looked at the folks who were receiving the service, I had to ask myself the question, it's so different from what I know and from my experience, but these people are still made in the image of God. They have exceptional stories. They've had extraordinary lives, and yet they're ignored because they're living under a bridge or in a cardboard box or on the downtown east side. And I think once you take off they're different from the people I look after,
right,
and they're different from me, you realize we're all in this together. And I think contemporary culture is very good at shielding us from that.
Right.
And actually, if you stop and you turn head on and you look, you think, well, hang on a minute, how did they end up in that situation? Right. And I think that's the question to ask. How do these folks who are marginalized and forgotten end up where they did?
Yeah.
And how easy it could be for us. Yeah. You know, we're maybe 2 or 3 decisions away from homelessness.
Yeah.
We haven't had a war in Canada.
Yeah.
But what if our dear president south of the border decided that he wanted to annex Alaska and take over BC? Then we're in a very similar situation to the folks we serve. Yeah. And how would we handle that? And I think I don't want to be critical of society because that's not I'm just one person who made the decisions I made, and Ange too. But yeah, I think it's very easy to shield yourself, and it's very easy to not ask those questions because there's so much distraction around us that you don't have to look, you don't have to see.
Yeah. I like the story you told about serving refugees and then being exposed to people who are wrestling with addiction and facing your own judgment there of going, oh, I'm inclusive, I'm on the margins, I'm serving. And then all of a sudden you brush up against someone else who is other and go, oh, I've still got my own perspectives on where they are. And I wonder if that's increasingly an expanse that God invites us into, to constantly see that, no, that person isn't other, that person isn't other to you, that we're all in the same
boat.
None
of us are other.
Yeah, and to always check that bias like kind of all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As I said, I'm not perfect. I'm nowhere near, and I'm not a saint. And we all have our own biases, and we all have our own, we all make quick judgments about people, and usually we're wrong. And that's okay. And it's okay to be challenged and go, hang on a minute, if I did actually spend some time with these folks, how would I feel? Would it make me less? Yeah. Or would it make them more? Yeah. And I think that's the kind of direction. But I'm not an expert. So.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's something that is important to keep in mind, especially when it comes to people who wear Birkenstocks, because I often
I do judge you for them, and you know, as I've said many times, I think the boxes they come in are probably more attractive.
Maybe that's the next margin that God's going to call you to open up to.
Well, he's going to fight on his hands.
So we've got a couple questions that are coming in. First one might be kind of simple, and you can give us some pathways. Someone's asking, what's the best way to support Inasmuch?
Oh, that's a great question. It really depends on what skills they have. So if they want to get involved in a physical way, we always look for people who can teach English as a foreign language. That's a really handy one, or English as a second language. We look for people who are willing to, we're a not-for-profit, so, you know, we're often challenged financially. So we look for people who would be prepared to do fundraising for us. If they'd like to jump out of a plane and sponsored for that, I would happily push them. I would happily help them raise the money. So financial support, it could be something as simple as a monthly $5. Yeah. Like that makes a huge difference. And people go, oh, well, you know, it's not really doing much. It is doing an awful lot. Yeah. So there's a number of ways to get involved. And without sounding like a commercial, if you go to our website, inasmuch.ca, there is a volunteer tab, and you can see what's there. We often look for drivers who can help us.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when people move out of Inasmuch, we often look for furniture and things to set them up. And then for kids, having bicycles and just some of those donation type of things. Unfortunately, with COVID, we're limited to what we can accept at the moment. But all of those kind of things.
Yeah.
Just, again, it's that thing of don't think about what you can do, think about what the folks need.
Sure.
And come at it at that perspective. If I was new to Canada and I came with 2 suitcases, what would I need to get me started?
Everything. So there's a lot of ways to help, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question we have here is that, do you have a favorite story about someone that Inasmuch helped when they came to Canada? I know there's too many, but do you have one that you'd say, tonight this one stands out in my heart a little bit?
I guess, because I saw him today, a young Turkish guy who came to us. He was in his 30s. He had campaigned against the regime and the Erdogan government. He had been attacked and beaten and imprisoned and finally escaped. His journey to Canada was long. He ended up living in a garage outside San Francisco as an illegal immigrant. His money was taken and he eventually made his way to Canada. And so he came to Inasmuch and we walked with him on his journey, and he had terrible PTSD from the journey he had had. And so the guy had a number of issues that happened over the course of the year up until his hearing. He couldn't get a lawyer because his PTSD made him unable to articulate his story because it was so traumatic. Yeah. So we worked with him quite carefully on his hearing, and then he went to the hearing, and a refugee claimant hearing is like in front of a judge with witnesses and such like. And he had a very simple case, and he was able to articulate it just enough that the judge was able to say, on the basis of what you say, please, that you are a protected person in Canada and we will keep you. And so he got protected person status. And so we were driving back from Vancouver to Abbotsford, and we were talking, and he said, growing up in Turkey, and the issues in Turkey are about religion, and they're about the extremes of religion. And I hate religion, and I don't want anything to do with it, and I hate what happened. And then he paused a bit because he realized what he was saying. And I said to him, religion isn't all bad, and it depends on what your faith does. And I said, I'm a Christian, and that means in your world I'm religious. But because of what God has done for me, it allows me to do what I do for the folks, and all our team do for the folks who come to Inasmuch. And I said, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be doing it, and there wouldn't be the care that we've been able to provide you in the last year. And that's not to say we're marvelous. It's just to say that's our motivation. And he stopped talking and he looked out the window for a few minutes, and then he looked back at me and he said, well, I guess you could say Jesus changed the world. And to me,
that's a big turn in a moment in a car. Yeah.
He's a smart guy, and he thinks things through, and he realized what he'd been saying and contrasted it with what Jesus was doing for him through us. Yeah. And I think he realized that actually it is a radical faith, and it's not what he expected. Yeah. And so that's a favorite because it really shows why we do what we do. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's just
dozens
more that are just heart-wrenching and heartwarming, and I've heard many of them many times, and they're beautiful stories. So if you ever want to sit down with Richard or Angela and listen to these stories, they will gladly tell you and introduce people as well. So feel free to keep asking your questions, but I've got a few more for you that I wrote down. I wrote a ton down, actually, that I don't know if we'll get through. But I want to talk about true faith on the margins. And you talked about not just giving, but willing to actually know and accept help from people, and a little bit of that through the lens of the Good Samaritan, the story that Jesus told. And the question I guess I have is, and allow me just to flesh it out a little bit. Are we willing to accept help from people who we don't feel comfortable with? Because we can get really good at giving, because we can give it a distance, and then we can feel like we've maybe washed our hands a little bit. I've done my piece, and now I can relax and go back to my sanitized life. How do you feel that real faith on the margins looks different in that regard? Because I think that's the difference that people draw sometimes between just valuing giving or being generous and actually being concerned about the reality of justice and what that looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really big question.
I know.
I only have a small brain. You're challenging me with this.
From your experience, though,
if you come down to basics, and let's talk about religion. Let's talk about Christianity versus Muslim, or not versus. But if you look at it, when people come to Inasmuch, one might be a Christian, one might be a Muslim, one might be an atheist, but they're all in it together.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to go, actually, the person who's going to help me get a ride to the dentist, the person who's going to cook me a meal is actually the person who's I've been taught to hate. I've been taught not to deal with. And I think we as Western, comfortable British Columbian Christians find it very hard that there's goodness in other parts of the world in different, and it looks different and it sounds different to us. And so sometimes when I had a cold, for example, and one of our folks living at Inasmuch cooked me a meal, that's hard to accept when you're supposed to be looking after them and they start looking after you.
Right.
And so that's the switch in my brain where I go, hang on a minute, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
I don't have all the solutions, and I'm not the only one who can make it happen. There's many, many others who will make it happen and do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And I think a willingness to just open up our gaze a little at these folks who are doing so many good things and be prepared to accept help from people who don't look like us and don't sound like us. Because when you look at the Good Samaritan, that's where the help came from people who didn't look like the person who was beaten. Yeah.
And outright enemies culturally and historically. I think that's the gap that I sometimes feel that happens in Christian culture and Christian context is we're very happy about generosity and giving, but there can tend to be a distance, and there can tend to be still this sense of we've done our part, and what kind of happens behind the scenes in our heart is a little bit, even if we don't acknowledge it, is a bit of a savior complex with that, and a bit of a I'm still looking down on in a way. And we might not say that overtly, but there is those poor people versus actually realizing that we are all in the same boat. And that's one of the things I love about Inasmuch is that it gets us right down to the reality of what it means to live together and understand one another. And it strips away all of that pretense. And I think that story does as well, which is why Jesus tells it. It's like we are in the same boat. That's a wonderful answer to the complex question. I think that's what we're all about. So here's a question that's a little bit more connected to our pandemic, like right now, a specific question, because I think the more we have these Grow Summer Series discussions and we talk about things in the context of church, it's really easy to imagine that we're talking about a time that isn't right now. And we are living in a pretty historic moment. For the church, for the world, this is something that we didn't expect to shape our lifetimes, and yet it's going to. What do you think the danger is right now for the church and for Christians during the pandemic when it comes to things like faith on the margins? What's the danger, and what should be our priority right now?
Now, I am relentlessly positive.
Yes.
Like I always look for the good in things.
Yes.
So I don't see danger, I see opportunity. And I know that sounds really cliche, but it's not meant to.
Okay.
The opportunity we have now is to go, oops, church doesn't look like it did.
Yeah.
Like we can't have a mega church with hundreds of people singing and dancing together because we can't. It's dangerous. Yeah. So this gives us a fantastic opportunity to go, hang on a minute, what actually is church? Yeah. And what can church do that is different and radical and life-changing? And I'm really, really excited about some of the possibility, because if you if you turn church planting on its head and you go, instead of saying, we'll plant a church and we want people to come to us because we're Christian, and if they come to us, they'll find the gospel and they'll have the church experience. They can't do it. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to build a community from the beginning that through that community, people go, oh, hang on a minute.
Right.
We're actually doing church, and church doesn't look like songs on a screen or hymn books or an organ. It actually looks like people helping and walking with each other and being there in the good times and the bad times and the times when you want to scream and shout and cry because you're at rock bottom, and the times where you want to celebrate success. And if we build a community like that because of COVID, coming out of it, it could be world changing. It could transform the Lower Mainland, it could transform Vancouver, it could transform the world, because it switches everything like Jesus did and puts it on its head. And it brings the marginalized and the people who are on the edges and the forgotten ones right into the middle. And it says, you're the ones that are valuable. You're the people we need to walk with.
Yeah.
We're comfortable the way we are, but we don't want to be comfortable anymore. We want to be radical, and we want to love you in a way that makes you go, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't what I expected of Christianity.
Yeah.
I might be quite passionate about that.
Yeah, I'm hearing a little bit of passion there. And I've heard some of that passion before. And there increasingly seems to be this theme of church planting, which I find interesting, and I won't comment on it in either way. But that what you said earlier is I think right on, in terms of we're asking the question, well, what really about faith and what really about religion, what really about Christianity what's it really about, and what's it for, and what, when we shake it down, when we turn the snow globe and go like that, what's really the picture? And we ask that question within the church all the time. If we do gather, when we gather, what do we do when we do that? Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things we absolutely have to do, the church has historically always done, and it seems that it is quite simple. We can make it complex in a pre-COVID reality, and it did become complex, but it gets quite clear. We pray, we worship, we prioritize each other, and we meet need. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it is. And when you get down to that, and it maybe does take moments like that to say, this is an opportunity for us to recalibrate. And if we don't choose to take that opportunity, we're going to kind of miss the point of what we're all about.
And if you look at, and I'm not a theologian, and I haven't studied.
We're all theologians. We're all theologians. Yeah. We all think about God stuff, and the God stuff happens in the material, according to you, 20 minutes ago.
All right, then. But when you look at the Bible and you look at the New Testament, there is a very simple command, which is to love your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Mm. And think about what that means to you. Do I really love the people who are my neighbors? And however you choose to define that, as I love myself. And there's all kinds of discussion about, if I don't love me, how can I love other people, and all. That's not what I'm trying to get at. But it's about looking outside and going, hang on a minute, what can I do to make a difference? Yeah. And it might be financial, and I don't want people to think that contributing financially doesn't count. It matters immensely. Yeah. And there's some amazing people who have come alongside in as much, and they have transformed us financially.
And that's the gift that they
bring. The gift that they give. And I love it dearly. So I really don't want people to think that giving money is just an easy option. Yeah. Because it's not. And so that's one thing. And then the other command, if you look through the Bible, and I learned this probably from Rick Watts, it sounds like the kind of thing he would say, which was the thing that's most commanded in the Bible, beginning to end, is don't be afraid. Yeah. And I think fear is sometimes the thing that holds us back the most from getting involved. So I'll just be honest, I looked at the 3 homeless people outside of the Hub Community Centre, one of whom was nodding out because of drugs, and I was afraid because I don't know what to do. And so that was the point where I went, hang on a minute, if they are really made in the image of God, and they are, then I have to change, not them. I have to change my thought. And so the way I dealt with my fear was I went and talked to the people who were looking after them, and I learned their story. And then I learned how to deal with drug overdoses and the training that you do to
Yeah.
bring people back
Yeah.
out of an opioid overdose. And now I'm not afraid. If I see what happens, I know what to do.
Yeah.
But there was a day and a half, 2 days where I was like, I can't do this. This is not like, I have nothing to offer.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes having something to offer is a granola bar at a traffic lights, or just sitting with someone, or not walking away when you're afraid.
Yeah. When you mentioned granola bars, it just makes me remember my wife, who is just the sweetest person in the world, who intentionally will buy.
I think you'll find actually it's my wife who's the sweetest in the world. Just to
There's a
correct you,
debate
I hate
there.
to.
Yeah, but Sarah she'll hate that I'm doing this, but she'll buy a bulk something from a store and just have it in the car. And I remember that. I said, "Why do you have a box of Dad's cookies in the back? Like, are you eating like when I was first dating her?" And well, I buy that just in case I bump into someone who needs it. And I don't look at the world that way, and sometimes we just need examples of people that say, that's my experience. And then to be inspired, how we might kind of be mindful of that. Right. So I think you've answered this question a little bit already, but I want to talk a little about your experience of learning how to be motivated by love, not by guilt. Because there's a lot that when it comes to caring for others, I think in our society, that pulls on the motivation of guilt, or pulls on the motivation of you're not doing enough. And that might be true, right? That we're not doing enough and we have to change. But the motivation to love and how that comes about, because often people turn off because they don't feel bad. They never even get through the door of collaborating and contributing, because right away they go, I'm just sick of seeing another World Vision commercial. And I'm not going that direction. Whether or not that's right, that's the reality that a lot of people, and they just go, I'm just going to anesthetize myself and go on to Amazon and buy another thing. Or I'm just going to watch another series on Netflix and forget about the horrors of the world. So how have you experienced learning to be motivated by love versus by guilt? Or are you still wrestling with that?
My concern is tonight that people will listen to this and listen to me and think that I have the answers, or I'm something else, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a messy, horrible human being like everybody else.
Yeah.
Was it Oscar Wilde who said, lying in the gutter looking at the stars? I don't know, whoever it was. But I don't feel anywhere qualified to answer these kinds of questions. So that's the caveat that goes with all of this.
Yeah.
Like, switch off YouTube and go, he was great, but now I'm going to go and read about it, because, we're all deeply flawed creatures. Is it guilt that drives me? No. I think when I first became a Christian, it was so radically different that it painted a picture of a world that was different to the one I lived in. And so it was attractive in an unexpected way.
Right.
And then Ange got involved with In As Much first, and I saw the joy that she had in teaching English to folks, and what a huge difference it made in their lives.
Yeah.
And that was inspirational, because I suddenly thought, well, hang on a minute, being a Christian, being involved in ministry and all of those words we choose to wrap things up in, actually doesn't really count for anything. What counts for something is you going, well, I can do that. I can go and peel potatoes. I can do that. That counts. That's doing missionary work.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to go on a short-term missions trip or lead a Bible study, or, because I would be terrible at that. But what you can do is go, oh, hang on a minute, I can do this, and this is where it would fit. So I would say there's a couple of things that motivate me. Love, number one, without doubt, is the most important thing, because that's the thing that changes the world.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that Jesus commanded us to do. So it's very easy to go, actually, I love doing what I do because I love the people. I don't necessarily always like the people. And that's a distinction to make.
Yeah.
Sometimes the people we love are not the people we like. And they're difficult and awkward and carry their own baggage, but we're commanded to love them anyway.
Yeah. They might be our enemies.
Exactly. So there's a point where you go, hang on a minute, I really don't like what you're doing. I'm not finding you very attractive in you doing what you're doing, but I still love you. And that love can look in different ways.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, and you know, I guess it'll make you smile, but the old-fashioned notion of duty and doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And when you read the Bible, it is the right thing to do.
Right.
And so there's an element of duty there, not from drudgery and, oh, I have to do it. This is, it's because, and maybe, you know, I think of my granny when I think of duty, and I think I've probably told you this story. My granny was a very old-fashioned Victorian aged grandmother who would change for dinner, and she would serve a little schooner of sherry on a silver tray, and you know, but she never complained, and she just did her duty. And for us as grandchildren watching it, she modeled what it's like to just do the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is saying nothing, or sometimes doing the right thing is speaking up and challenging something. So I think love and that old-fashioned notion of duty and service are vital. Like without that notion, you just do it.
Yeah. So there's an intersection there of going, I'm compelled by love to do this, but love is not just a feeling; it's a conviction, and that goes with that sense of duty that I'm going to do what's right.
Yeah. And it's expressed in action.
Yeah, and sometimes that feeling isn't necessarily prior; it's sometimes during or after. That just makes me remember, like you've referenced multiple points now, experiencing and observing joy in the work and what people are doing and how they're a part of it. And that just reminds me of Luke's gospel, which you referenced with the Good Samaritan, where throughout Luke's gospel, one of the consistent themes is wherever Jesus turns up, there's joy. And I think that's something that we don't always believe is on the other side of love and service, because in our context, in our culture, we believe that if we serve ourselves and pursue our own happiness, then we're going to find joy. And yet through generosity, through service, through loving like God loves, as we see through Jesus, that the experience of Jesus, the experience of what is described as salvation in that gospel, which is a big word, not just what we think about the soul popping up to heaven. It's a bigger term than that, is this sense of joy. And joy is what compels. And you talk to anyone who's really discovered a faith, a genuine faith in God through Jesus, and that's usually what you hear. There was a light, there was a joy. That's what drew me in, and that's what I've experienced.
And that's true of the people when I wasn't a Christian, the people I met through work. And I'm thinking of one particular person who was incredibly influential on me, and her faith was joyful. And I'd never met Christians who laughed at things and who had a sense of humor and were sarcastic and were rude to me. And I just warmed her, and I realized that what she had was something I didn't have. And I fought for 4 years to be convinced it wasn't Jesus. I was wrong, and she will forever be able to go, you were wrong, which will give her joy. So I think, yes, I think joy is really important. And if you look at our incredible team members, and I think of our team meeting that we had on Tuesday with Tammy and Michelle and Alyssa and Laurie and Lisa and Gary and Ange, and we're on a Zoom call together and we're socially distanced, and yet we're still committed to that vision that we have of an Inasmuch family, and the joy that the team members bring together makes Inasmuch function seamlessly, because we all have that mission of joy. And if I may add, just it's a bit of a cheesy thing to say, and it's literally the only thing I remember from Sunday school growing up, because I abandoned it all at an early age, that the Sunday school teacher said it's really easy to remember how to find joy. And that's the order of the word. Jesus, others, yourself.
Wow.
And that's how you find joy. Put it in that order and you're there. And, you know, maybe some of the lessons we learn in Sunday school are probably the most important ones.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Maybe we need to close with that. Jesus, others, yourself. That's the way towards joy. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
For joining us, Richard. And again, just on behalf of those that are watching and everything, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for the work that goes on at Inasmuch. And I know that we would, again, obviously always pass on as a church to Inasmuch and to the team. Thank you so much. And it's great to hear the creative ways. We talk about too much tonight, the creative ways in which Inasmuch is serving right now during the pandemic. And so we bless you and we thank you for continuing to keep the interests of the marginalized in front of us continually as a community of faith. Thank you for that.
And thank you to Living Waters for your incredible generosity, for the support you give, in as much not just financially, but also spiritually and emotionally. And it's our mine and Angela's church home, and Gordon Donnie are on our board. So we really, really appreciate Living Waters, and we love the work that you do. So thank you. And great hair, by the way. Just really, really good.
I appreciate it. We appreciate your encouragement. We're going to end with that note. But
I think we should.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight, Richard. Thank you for everybody who's joined us this evening live. And if you're watching later on as well, just want to remind you that there are, I think we've got 4 or 5 other talks that we've done already this summer with a wide range of people. And we have 2 more left this summer. The next couple of weeks, you're going to be hearing more about them, or you can learn on our website right now. The talks are posted as what we're going to be talking about. And you can also find on our website and on YouTube the previous talks that we've had. And we just encourage you to participate in those by watching those recordings if you've already missed them. Thanks for joining us tonight. This has been Grow Summer Sessions. We'll see you in 2 weeks when we're going to be sitting down with Jennifer Adkins, and we're going to be talking about racism in Canada. We've had a couple of contexts where we've already done that, but we're going to be doing that with our Grow Summer Sessions. That's in 2 weeks on a Thursday night. We hope to see you then. Thanks for joining us.